Thomas Buck Rayner had spent almost his entire life under the open sky. Even at 70 years old, he woke before sunrise every morning, put on the same old boots he had worn for years, and saddled his horse with quiet care. Buck believed the land talked to people who listened. And after so many years of working as a cowboy across the wide deserts and mesas of northern Arizona, he had learned to listen better than most. On a warm autumn morning, Buck was riding near an old trail that ran along a high mesa. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft pink and gold. The desert felt peaceful, only the wind moved, blowing gently across the dry grass. Buck liked mornings like this. They reminded him of a time long ago when he was young, and the world felt new. His horse, Rusty, walked calmly, stopping now and then to sniff the ground. Buck noticed Rusty's ears twitching in a certain direction. That meant something unusual was nearby. Animals reacted faster than people, and Buck trusted Rusty's senses more than his own. "Easy, boy," Buck murmured as he brushed the horse's neck. The horse gave a small snort. Buck looked around and spotted a set of hoofprints on the ground, the dirt freshly moved. He leaned forward in his saddle and studied them. The shape, the distance between the prints, the depth. He learned a lot from such small signs. A Mustang had passed through recently, and by the look of the tracks, the Mustang had been in pain. "Wounded," Buck whispered to himself. He felt a familiar pull of concern. Wild Mustangs were proud animals. They survived in harsh places and trusted no one. If one was hurt and alone, it would struggle. Buck decided to follow the tracks just to make sure the animal wasn't suffering too much. He nudged Rusty forward, and they moved at a slow, careful pace. Meanwhile, several miles away, a young woman named Alyssa Nez was following the same Mustang's trail. Alyssa was a wildlife researcher from the Apache community. For the past 3 years, she had worked on a project that documented Mustangs living near tribal lands. She cared deeply for the animals and studied their habits so they could be protected. Alyssa was smart, strong-willed, and used to rough terrain, but even she could tell that this Mustang was difficult to track. It left sharp, uneven hoofprints and long drag marks in the dirt. Something was wrong with one of its back legs. She pushed through brush, stepped over fallen logs, and wiped sweat from her forehead. She had been on the trail since dawn and was determined not to lose it. "This poor thing," she muttered. "I hope I'm not too late." Alyssa did not expect to see anyone else out here. Most people stayed on marked trails. She certainly did not expect to see an older man riding a horse with such calm confidence that he looked like part of the landscape itself. The moment she first saw Buck was almost strange. She heard Rusty's footsteps before she saw the rider. When she turned, she spotted the old cowboy coming toward her with a slow, steady rhythm. He sat tall in the saddle. His weathered face held years of sun, dust, and hard work, yet there was something gentle in the way he carried himself. Alyssa lifted her hand in greeting. "Good morning." Buck touched the brim of his hat politely. "Mornin'. You out here tracking the same Mustang I'm following?" "You saw the tracks too?" she asked, surprised. "Hard to miss," Buck said with a small nod. "Looks like its back legs hurt." She stepped closer. "I'm trying to help it. I work with wildlife. You know anything about Mustangs?" Buck gave a quiet laugh. "A thing or two. Been around horses longer than most folks have been alive." There was no bragging in his voice. It sounded more like a simple truth. Alyssa shrugged her backpack higher on her shoulders and asked, "Would you like to track it together? It might be safer." Buck studied her for a moment. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, but she moved with purpose and confidence. She wasn't just wandering around. She knew what she was doing. He respected that. "Sure," he said. "2 sets of eyes are better than one." They began walking side by side, Rusty following quietly. As they traveled, Alyssa tried to read the ground the same way Buck did. She could identify many things, like the age of tracks or the direction an animal was moving. But she noticed Buck saw even more. Sometimes he paused, touching the dirt with his fingertips. Sometimes he looked at a broken twig or a disturbed patch of grass. Other times he listened to the wind or glanced at the distant hills, as if the land itself was speaking to him. "How did you learn all this?" Alyssa finally asked. Time, Buck replied. A lot of time. You pay attention long enough. You start seeing patterns. It's impressive, she said honestly. Really impressive. I've met plenty of people who claim to know horses. But you understand them. Buck smiled a little, almost embarrassed. Compliments were not something he heard often. They walked for another hour until they reached a small clearing, where the Mustang stood trembling beside a cluster of rocks. Its dark coat glistened in the sunlight, though dust covered most of it. The animal lifted its head when it heard them approach, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. Alyssa froze. We don't want to scare it more. Buck raised his hand slowly. Let me try. What happened next surprised Alyssa so much she did not breathe for several seconds. Buck stepped forward with the calm, easy rhythm of someone walking through his own backyard. He did not rush. He did not speak. He simply breathed slow, deep breaths that matched the quiet flow of the morning wind. The Mustang pawed at the ground nervously at first. Then, little by little, it settled. Buck lowered his head slightly. Keeping his movements gentle and predictable, the Mustang watched him with frightened eyes, but it did not run. Rusty, trained by years of experience, stayed perfectly still behind him. Alyssa was stunned. She had seen skilled horse handlers before, but never anything like this. Buck looked as if he were communicating with the Mustang, not with words but with presence and respect. How is he doing that? She whispered to herself. Buck reached the Mustang's side slowly. He examined the injured leg without touching it. The Mustang let him come close enough to see that a piece of sharp rock had cut deep into the flesh. It wasn't life-threatening, but it had caused real pain. After a few minutes, Buck backed away, giving the Mustang space. It'll heal, he said softly to Alyssa. Just needs rest, and maybe a little help keeping the wound clean. Alyssa stepped forward, amazed. I've never seen anyone calm a wild Mustang like that. You're like someone out of an old story, Buck chuckled. Just learned to move slow. Animals don't trust sudden things. Alyssa shook her head in wonder. I mean it. It's rare to see someone with such natural skill. Such a skilled old cowboy deserves to pass on his genes. The words slipped out before she fully realized what she was saying. She meant it jokingly, in the way one might say someone should pass down their talent, but as soon as the words left her mouth, her cheeks grew warm. She hoped he wouldn't misunderstand. Buck blinked, surprised by her enthusiastic comment. Then he gave a soft laugh, the kind that came from deep in the chest. Well, he said kindly, I don't know about that, but I appreciate the thought. Alyssa covered her face with one hand, embarrassed. Sorry. I didn't mean it in a weird way. I meant your talent deserves to be passed on. People could learn so much from you. Buck nodded slowly. I know what you meant. She lowered her hand and smiled sheepishly. Good. Because, honestly, what you did was incredible. Buck did not reply right away. He looked out over the desert, where the wind brushed through the tall grass like a soft wave. He had never thought much about passing on anything, not skills, not knowledge, not legacy. He lived quietly, keeping to himself, riding his horse, working with animals, and caring for the land. He never imagined anyone would see value in his way of life. But here was a young woman, full of energy, purpose, and respect for the land, telling him that what he knew mattered. Something warm stirred in his chest, something like pride he had not felt in years. Alyssa stepped closer to the Mustang and spoke softly, keeping her voice gentle. I can clean the wound and put some salve on it. It should be fine in a few days. Buck nodded. I'll help. Together they worked calmly. Buck held Rusty still, and Rusty's presence helped keep the Mustang relaxed. Alyssa cleaned the wound, working with steady hands. When they finished, the Mustang limped away a few steps, then turned to look at them before walking deeper into the brush. Alyssa exhaled. We did it. Buck smiled. You did the hard part. No, she said. You did the part that made everything possible. They stood quietly for a moment, letting the morning air move around them. It felt like the start of something neither of them had expected: a partnership, a friendship, or maybe something even stronger than that. The beginning of a shared mission. As they began the walk back to the trail, Alyssa glanced at the old cowboy beside her. She wondered how much knowledge he held inside him, how many stories he carried, and how much of that could help future generations understand the land better. And Buck, for the first time in a long while, wondered whether he might have something worth sharing after all. Alyssa and Buck walked back toward the trail where they had first met, moving at a slow and relaxed pace. The morning sun had warmed the earth, and everything around them glowed with soft golden light. Even though they had only known each other for a few hours, they walked side by side as if they had been partners on many long journeys. Something about helping the Mustang had created an easy connection between them. Alyssa kept glancing at Buck, still amazed by what she had seen earlier. She had met many skilled horse trainers and researchers, but none of them could calm a wild Mustang the way he had. It felt almost magical, though Buck himself seemed to think it was nothing special. "Do you always help animals like that?" Alyssa finally asked. Buck shrugged lightly. "Whenever I can. I figure if a creature's in trouble and I'm close enough to lend a hand, it's worth trying. That's a good way to live," she said quietly. Buck didn't answer, but his small smile told her he appreciated the remark. After a while, they reached a flat, open stretch of land with a wide view of the mesas and distant hills. They stopped there to rest. Rusty grazed on some dry grass, while Alyssa opened her water bottle and took a drink. The silence between them felt peaceful, rather than awkward. Alyssa sat on a rock, swinging her legs slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," Buck replied. "How old were you when you started working with horses?" Buck took a slow breath as if remembering. "About 12. My father worked on ranches, and I helped him whenever I wasn't in school. Back then, there wasn't much else for kids to do except work with animals or help around the land." "And you liked it?" "Oh, I loved it," Buck said with a chuckle. "The land teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else. Patience, respect, paying attention. Horses especially. They'll show you your own mood. If you're calm, they calm down. If you're upset, they feel it." Alyssa listened carefully. She didn't want to miss a single word. She pulled out a small notebook from her backpack and quickly jotted down a few notes. Buck noticed and smiled. "You take notes fast." "I have to," she said. "My research project requires clear records. And besides, people should know what you know. Skilled people like you shouldn't let your knowledge disappear." Buck paused at those words. He lowered his gaze, letting the idea settle in his mind. "Not sure anyone wants to learn from an old cowboy like me." Alyssa tilted her head. "Why would you think that?" "Times are changing," he said with a soft sigh. "Ranches are fewer. Kids are interested in screens and machines. My way of doing things, well, it's old-fashioned." "Old-fashioned doesn't mean useless," she said firmly. "Some things shouldn't be forgotten, like your understanding of the land. That's important." Buck cleared his throat and looked away, touched by the sincerity in her voice. "Maybe. I never thought of it that way." Alyssa closed her notebook and stood up. "I'm serious, Buck. You have something rare. I've read tons of studies, met experts, and traveled to different field sites. But no one works like you. You move with the land. You read signs others miss. You connect with animals in a gentle way. If we don't learn from people like you, we lose something valuable." Buck rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't know how to respond. Compliments made him uncomfortable because he had never seen himself as special. He had just lived a simple, honest life. Still, something about Alyssa's words warmed him, like sunlight reaching an old corner of his heart that had been cold for years. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Means more than you think." They continued walking, and soon the trail curved near a small stream. Buck dismounted Rusty and let him drink. Alyssa knelt by the water, washing dust from her hands. "You said earlier you're doing research," Buck said. "What kind, exactly?" Alyssa dried her hands on her pants. "I'm working on a project to protect Mustangs and preserve local knowledge about how they behave. The elders from my community taught me a lot: how to respect the land, how to watch for signs, how to understand animal paths. I want to combine traditional knowledge with modern research, so the Mustangs stay safe. That's a fine goal, Buck said warmly. She smiled at him. Thank you. But it's not easy. There aren't many people left who have real field experience. Most researchers study from books or computers. But knowledge from people who lived close to the land their whole lives, that's priceless. That's why meeting you today feels like, well, like an important moment. Buck raised an eyebrow. Important? Yes, she said with quiet certainty. You're what some people would call a living archive. Buck laughed, shaking his head. I've never heard anyone call me that before. Well, now you have, she said happily. They walked along the stream until the ground began to rise again. The path narrowed, but they moved easily, enjoying the clear afternoon air. Birds chirped in the trees, and tiny lizards darted across warm rocks. You ever think about teaching? Alyssa asked suddenly. Buck blinked. Teaching? Me? Yes, why not? Ain't much of a teacher, he said. I'm better at doing things than explaining them. But teaching isn't about fancy words, she told him. It's about showing, demonstrating. You already do that naturally. Buck thought back to the Mustang from earlier. He hadn't explained anything to Alyssa, yet she had watched him and understood. Maybe there was something to teaching that he hadn't considered before. You really think anyone would want to learn from me? He asked. Alyssa looked at him with open honesty. Yes, absolutely. Her answer was so clear and confident that Buck felt something shift inside him, small but noticeable. A door he had always kept closed began to open just a little. They reached a tall rock formation that gave shade from the growing heat. Alyssa sat under it, stretching her legs. Buck stood nearby, leaning on Rusty's saddle horn. You ever think about family? She asked gently. Buck hesitated. Not much. Did you ever want kids? He stared off at the distant mesas. Life just never worked out that way. I guess I figured I'd pass on things by living well, not by raising anyone. Thanks for watching. Things were Alan. Alyssa nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. But you know, passing on knowledge is another kind of family. Not by blood, by wisdom. Buck absorbed her words slowly, letting them settle into places he didn't touch, often feelings about age, purpose, and time slipping by. Maybe, he said, almost whispering. Alyssa shifted closer, not intruding but showing gentle support. For people like you, Buck, legacy doesn't mean having a child. It means leaving behind understanding. You are part of this land's story. That shouldn't end when you're gone. Buck swallowed. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not with such clarity or respect. He had always seen himself as a simple worker, someone who lived quietly and caused no trouble. Hearing Alyssa describe him as someone important made him feel almost emotional, though he kept his face calm. You've got a kind heart, he said softly. And you've got something worth sharing, she replied. They rested a little longer before continuing onward. Alyssa asked questions every now and then, and Buck answered them patiently. She asked how he could tell which tracks were fresh. He showed her how to look for loose grains of dirt around the print's edges. She asked how he knew when a horse was relaxed. He talked about ear positions, breathing patterns, and tail behavior. Alyssa wrote all of it in her notebook, but she also watched carefully, trying to learn directly from his movements. As the afternoon stretched on, they reached the spot where Alyssa had parked her truck early that morning. It sat alone at the edge of the trail, covered in a thin layer of dust. Well, she said with a small sigh, this is where I stop. Buck looked at the truck, then back at Alyssa. You headed home? Yes. I need to organize my notes and prepare a report for my team. She paused before adding, but I want to meet again. I want to learn more from you. If you're willing. Buck didn't respond immediately. He looked out at the long road stretching across the desert, then at Rusty, who flicked his tail lazily. The thought of teaching someone had never crossed Buck's mind before today. But now, it didn't feel strange. It felt right. "I reckon I'd be willing," he said at last. Alyssa's face brightened with relief and excitement. "Really? Really?" Buck said, smiling softly. She closed her notebook. "Then it's a promise." Buck tipped his hat. "A promise." A gentle breeze brushed past them, carrying the warm smell of sage and desert grass. It felt like the land itself approved of their decision. Alyssa climbed into her truck but paused before closing the door. "You know, Buck, I meant every word I said earlier. Skilled people like you shouldn't let their knowledge fade away. What you know should be shared. Your experience deserves to continue." Buck gave a shy nod, once again moved by her sincerity. "We'll see what can be done." And as Alyssa drove away, Buck sat quietly on Rusty, watching her truck until it disappeared down the dusty road. For the first time in many years, he felt something new, not loneliness, not tiredness, but purpose. A reason to keep going. A reason to give something of himself to the world. A beginning. Alyssa arrived the next morning with the same energy she always carried when she was excited about something. She had barely slept the night before, not because she was restless, but because she had been thinking about everything Buck knew and how much of it could help her project. She had written page after page of notes. But she knew that notes were only the beginning. She needed to watch him work again, learn from his movements, his choices, and the small details only experience could teach. When she reached Buck's small ranch house, she saw him already outside, brushing Rusty's coat. The old cowboy looked completely at home in the quiet morning air. Birds chirped from the trees, and a soft glow spread across the sky as the sun rose. Buck looked up when he heard Alyssa's truck. "You're early," he said with a smile. "I didn't want to waste any daylight," Alyssa replied, stepping out and waving cheerfully. Buck nodded toward Rusty. "Just getting the boy ready." Alyssa approached the horse and gently patted his neck. Rusty snorted softly in recognition. She had met many horses, but Rusty had a calmness that made her feel welcome, as if he somehow understood that she was there to learn. "What's the plan today?" Alyssa asked. Buck leaned against the rail. "Well, if you want to learn, we might as well start with the basics. Tracking, reading land, understanding horse behavior, simple things first." Alyssa grinned. "Simple things for you, not for everyone else." Buck chuckled and shook his head. "All right then, we'll see how much you can pick up." She followed him as he walked around the ranch yard. He showed her how he stored tools, how he checked a saddle for safety, and how he read the sky for weather changes. Each small detail came with a story, and each story came with a lesson. Alyssa wrote quickly in her notebook, but Buck noticed she also paid close attention to the way he moved. She was a student who watched with both her eyes and her heart. After they prepared, Buck saddled Rusty and handed Alyssa a canteen. "Let's go down to the lower trails. Good place to learn." They started toward the open land behind the ranch. Buck walked beside Rusty, and Alyssa followed a few steps behind, taking in every sound, every smell, and every shift of the wind. As they walked, Buck suddenly stopped and pointed to the ground. "Tell me what you see," he said. Alyssa bent down and studied the dirt carefully. There were two different sets of prints. Some from deer, light and pointed, and another set that looked slightly deeper and rounder. She studied them for a moment longer. "The deer passed through earlier this morning," she said slowly. "But those rounder prints, maybe a small horse or a mule?" Buck nodded approvingly. "Not bad. Now look, close at the edge of the print." She leaned closer, brushing away loose dirt. The outer edge was crisp on one side and a little collapsed on the other. Buck smiled. "That little collapse tells you which direction it was moving." Alyssa looked up in surprise. "How did I not notice that?" "Because most folks look at a print," Buck said. "You gotta look through it, see what the earth is trying to tell you." She scribbled down the note. "Look through the print," she repeated softly. "Got it." They walked again, and soon Buck stepped off the trail toward a large patch of grass. He pointed to a faint track where grass bent slightly lower than the rest. "Animal walked here," he explained. Alyssa stared hard. I can barely see anything. You're not supposed to see it right away, Buck said kindly. Give it time. She crouched and observed the tiny details. The way some blades of grass leaned in one direction, the small space between them, and a thin line where the soil had been disturbed. Is this from the same deer? She asked. Buck grinned. See? It's starting to make sense. Alyssa felt a small burst of pride. They spent the next hour walking through different parts of the trail. Buck showed her how to read broken twigs, how to identify fresh droppings without touching them, and how certain birds changed their calls when humans or animals passed nearby. He taught her how to listen for silence too, because sometimes silence told more than noise. Alyssa absorbed everything like a sponge. She felt more alive than she had in a long time. Her world was usually full of reports, deadlines, and data charts. But out here, with Buck guiding her, learning felt natural like breathing. At one point, they reached a spot where the land dipped gently. Buck stopped and held up a hand. Listen. Alyssa froze. Her heartbeat slowed. The wind quieted for a moment. She heard something soft, faint hoofbeats from a distance, steady and rhythmic. Horses, she whispered. Buck smiled proudly. Not bad. A small herd of mustangs appeared on a hill. They were in no rush, moving gracefully across the land. Alyssa's eyes widened. She had seen mustangs many times, but seeing them unexpectedly always felt like a gift. They're beautiful, she breathed. They sure are, Buck agreed. Smart too. You can learn a lot just by watching. Alyssa watched one mustang, tall, brown, with a black mane, stop and sniff the air. It lifted its head, turning slightly toward them. They know we're here, Buck said quietly. Alyssa nodded. But they don't seem scared. They're more curious than scared, Buck replied. Animals can sense calm energy. If you're gentle, they feel it. Alyssa looked at Buck, remembering how he had calmed the wounded mustang the day before. You really understand them, she said softly. Buck didn't respond right away. He simply watched the mustangs with peaceful eyes. You gotta respect them, he finally said. That's how you learn from them. After the herd moved away, they continued walking. Alyssa knew Buck had so much more to teach, and she wanted every second of it. Do you ever get tired of this? She asked. Never, Buck said. As long as I can move and breathe, I'll be out here somewhere. Alyssa smiled. You sound like someone who belongs to the land. Buck gave her a curious look. What about you? Why'd you start researching wildlife? Alyssa paused before answering. My grandmother, she finally said. She taught me to respect every living thing. She'd take me outside at night and tell me stories about the stars, the wind, the animals, and how everything is connected. I grew up wanting to protect that connection. Buck nodded gently. She sounds wise. She was, Alyssa said softly. And I want to honor her by doing good work. You're doing it, Buck said. Takes heart to protect things. Alyssa felt her eyes warm a little. Thanks, Buck. That means a lot. The day continued with more lessons. Buck showed her how to approach a horse carefully, how to read its breathing, how to stand so the horse didn't feel threatened. He didn't make it complicated, he made it natural. Most people rush, he explained. Animals don't rush. They wait, they watch, they trust slowly. If you try to hurry trust, you lose it. Alyssa understood the truth in his words. Not just for animals but for people too. They ate lunch under a large juniper tree. Alyssa shared homemade sandwiches, and Buck brought fresh fruit from his kitchen. They talked about their lives, their families, and how the world had changed over the years. Buck told stories about his childhood, some funny, some touching, and Alyssa listened with genuine interest. You've lived a full life, she said. Buck smiled softly. Still living it. After lunch, they continued the lessons until the sunlight turned a deep gold. By then, Alyssa had filled nearly 10 pages of notes. Her hand was tired, but her heart felt full. Buck, she said as they walked back toward the ranch, your knowledge is amazing, and I want to help you share it. I really do. Buck looked surprised. Share it? How? I want to record your skills, she said. Videos, interviews, written guides, anything that can help others learn. I want your wisdom to be saved, not forgotten. Buck took a moment to process that. You want to record me workin'? Yes, she said. Not to make anything fancy. Just to keep a record. So younger people can learn the right way. Your way. Record. Buck felt something shift inside him again. He had never imagined anyone wanting to record his simple life. The idea made him feel shy, proud, and nervous all at once. You think it's worth all that? He asked. Alyssa smiled warmly. I think it's more than worth it. Buck looked around at the open land he had known all his life, the land he loved, the land he understood like an old friend. He realized that Alyssa was offering him something he had never expected. A chance to leave something behind. I reckon we can try, he said softly. Alyssa's smile grew wide. Really? Buck nodded. Really. She almost hugged him, but stopped herself, and instead held out her hand. Thank you. Buck shook her hand gently. Thank you for asking. As the sky turned orange and pink, they walked back to the ranch with a new sense of purpose. Alyssa knew she had found a mentor. Buck knew he had found someone who cared about what he could offer, and both of them understood that the work they had begun together was only the beginning of something meaningful. The weeks that followed moved gently, like the slow passing of warm summer days. Every morning, Alyssa arrived at Buck's ranch with her notebook, her camera, and her steady curiosity. And every morning, Buck greeted her with a quiet smile, a cup of warm tea, and a new lesson waiting to be shared. Alyssa recorded everything. She filmed Buck saddling Rusty, showing how he checked each strap, each buckle, each small detail most people never noticed. She filmed him reading the land, the shift of dust under the wind, the shade patterns on a hill, the small curve of a hoofprint half hidden by grass. She filmed him approaching mustangs with slow steps, letting them sense him, trust him, and accept his presence. Sometimes she would talk, asking questions. Other times she stayed silent, making sure the recording captured the natural rhythm of Buck's work. The way he breathed, the way he paused before touching a horse, the way he listened to the land before taking a step. Buck never imagined his simple life would ever be captured on camera. It felt strange at first. But the more he worked with Alyssa, the more he realized she wasn't trying to make something fancy or dramatic. She wanted the truth, his experience, his way of living, and Buck began to feel proud of that. One morning, Alyssa arrived with a new kind of excitement shining in her eyes. Buck, she said breathlessly as she hopped out of her truck. I talked to the Wildlife Education Center on tribal land. They loved the sample videos I sent them. Buck blinked. You sent them already? Just the short ones, she explained warmly. Only the clips we agreed on. They said your teaching style is amazing. They want to invite you to speak at a youth workshop. Buck's jaw dropped slightly. Me? Speak at a workshop? Alyssa laughed softly, not unkindly. Yes, you. Why are you so surprised? Buck rubbed the back of his neck, shy and unsure. I'm not used to talking in front of a bunch of young folks. You won't be alone, Alyssa said gently. I'll be there. And all you have to do is be yourself. Buck wasn't sure if being himself was enough. He had spent most of his life with animals, not crowds. He felt safer with horses than with people. But there was something about Alyssa's trust, steady, clear, and warm, that helped him believe he could try. When is this workshop? He asked quietly. In 2 weeks, Alyssa replied. We have plenty of time to prepare. Buck nodded slowly. All right. I reckon I'll give it a try. Alyssa's smile lit up her entire face. Thank you, Buck. The kids will love learning from you. Buck hoped she was right. The next 2 weeks were filled with careful planning. Alyssa helped Buck organize his videos, choose which lessons to share, and write simple talking points. She practiced with him under the shade of the big juniper tree, asking questions the way the kids might ask them. Buck answered as best as he could, sometimes stumbling over his words, sometimes expressing himself perfectly through quiet stories rather than speeches. Teaching isn't about being perfect, Alyssa reminded him. It's about being real. And that's something you're good at. Buck felt calmer each time she said that. The day of the workshop arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze. Buck wore clean jeans, a simple buttoned shirt, and his old but well-kept hat. Rusty had been brushed until his brown coat shone warmly in the sun. Alyssa wore a comfortable field jacket and carried her notebook and camera, as always. When they reached the Tribal Education Center, Buck felt his heart beat a little faster. Children and teenagers stood in small groups, chatting and laughing. Their parents sat at picnic tables nearby, while elders from the community watched everything with quiet pride. Alyssa placed a comforting hand on Buck's arm. "You've already done the hard part," she said gently. "Today is just sharing." Buck took a deep breath. "Let's hope the land gives me the right words." Alyssa smiled. "It will." The workshop began with a simple introduction from one of the program leaders. Then Alyssa stood in front of the crowd and introduced Buck. "This is Thomas Buck Rayner," she said with clear, warm confidence. "He has spent his whole life working with horses and listening to the land. He has knowledge that we don't want to lose. Today, he's here to share what he knows. And I hope you all learn from him like I have." People clapped politely. Buck stepped forward, nervous at first. His voice was a little shaky when he said, "Mornin', everyone." But then something wonderful happened. A little boy raised his hand and asked, "Mr. Buck, how do you know when a horse is scared?" Buck relaxed the moment he heard the question. That was something he could talk about easily. He smiled gently and said, "Well, first thing is the ears. They tell you a lot. Let me show you." From there, the questions kept coming shy at first. Then steady. Then curious and full of energy. "How can you tell how old a horse is? What do you do when a Mustang won't come near you? How do you read tracks so fast? Can you teach us how to move quietly like you do?" Buck answered each one with calm patience, demonstrating with Rusty and showing the kids small details. The rhythm of a horse's breath, the meaning of a tail flick, the way grass bends when an animal walks through. He didn't need big words or fancy terms. His explanations were simple, honest, and full of respect. Alyssa watched from the side, her chest filling with a warm pride she could barely contain. She had always believed Buck had something important to give, but seeing children and elders listening to him so carefully, seeing them light up with understanding, made her feel emotional. Near the end of the workshop, one teenage girl asked, "How did you learn all this? Did someone teach you?" Buck looked out across the group, his eyes soft. "Some things I learned from my father. Some I learned from years of work. But a lot of it came from just being quiet and paying attention to the world. The land has a way of talking if you listen long enough." A thoughtful silence followed his words. Then, softly but clearly, Alyssa spoke from the side of the group. "That's why I told Buck he deserves to pass on his knowledge. Because once voices like his disappear, we lose a part of our connection with the land." Everyone turned toward her, and Buck felt heat rise in his cheeks. He remembered the first time she said those words, how embarrassed he had been. But now, hearing her say them again, he understood their meaning differently. It wasn't about him being special. It was about the land being special, and the responsibility of sharing what the land had taught him. The workshop ended with loud applause. Several families came to talk to Buck afterward, thanking him for his time and wisdom. Children petted Rusty, laughing happily as the gentle horse lowered his head toward them. Some of the elders shook Buck's hand with deep respect. One elderly woman told him, "You remind me of the old storytellers, the ones who taught with their hearts." Ah, Buck felt humbled by the words. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. When the crowd finally thinned and the sun began to lean toward the horizon, Buck and Alyssa walked back toward their vehicles. The light cast long shadows across the land, turning everything golden. Rusty walked beside them, calm as ever. Alyssa looked up at Buck. "You did it." Buck took a slow breath, feeling tired but fulfilled. "Couldn't have done it without you. You did most of it, she said with a smile. I just helped you get there. Buck looked out at the open sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his life had purpose again, not just in the simple work of the ranch or the quiet companionship of nature, but in truly giving something back. You know, he said softly. Maybe passing on what you know is how you stay part of the world, even when you're not around anymore. Alyssa nodded, her eyes warm. That's exactly it. They reached her truck, and Alyssa turned to face him. Thank you for trusting me, Buck. This whole project, it's going to help so many people. And it's going to keep your knowledge alive for years to come. Buck felt a gentle peace settle in his chest. And thank you for believing in an old cowboy. Alyssa laughed softly. Always. As she climbed into her truck and Buck prepared to mount Rusty, a soft breeze drifted across the land. It carried the scent of sage and distant grass, as if the earth itself was acknowledging everything they had done together. Alyssa waved through the open window. See you tomorrow? Buck tipped his hat and smiled. Wouldn't miss it. And as her truck rolled down the dusty road and disappeared into the warm evening light, Buck sat tall in his saddle, feeling the kind of quiet joy that only comes from knowing your life has touched others. He watched the sun sink slowly behind the mesas, the sky glowing with gentle colors. In that moment, Buck knew that his journey wasn't ending, it was changing. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was a teacher, a guide, a keeper of stories. And thanks to Alyssa, he finally understood that his legacy wasn't something he had lost. It was something he had just begun to share.